It's Writers' Day in Kentucky, and I am honored to introduce our newly appointed Kentucky Poet Laureate, Crystal Wilkinson. Crystal Wilkinson is a native of Casey County. Her appointment as Poet Laureate is especially significant because Crystal is the first black woman to hold this prestigious role ever in the Commonwealth. We are honored to introduce her as a part of today's Writers' Day, showing Kentuckians across the Commonwealth her moving work, exceptional talent, and love for her craft. Crystal is an award-winning author of 3 books, and her 4th book, Perfect Black, will be released in August from the University Press of Kentucky. Her work has been recognized with prestigious awards and recognitions, including the Kentucky Arts Council's Al Smith Individual Artist Fellowship. Her fiction, poems, and essays have also appeared in numerous journals and anthologies. Crystal is not only a writer, she's also an educator who's dedicated her life to shaping the brilliant minds of Kentuckians. She has shared her love and talent for writing with students at several Kentucky universities, 2 of which helped shape Crystal into the esteemed writer and dedicated educator she is today. Crystal is a proud alumni of Eastern Kentucky University and Spalding University and has worked with students at both Morehead State and Berea College. Currently, Crystal serves as an associate professor of English at the University of Kentucky. So it is my great honor to introduce her as the 2021-2022 Kentucky Poet Laureate. Crystal, on behalf of Team Kentucky, we congratulate you on this incredible milestone in your career. And we thank you. We thank you for your commitment to education in Kentucky and for sharing your talents with all of us here in the Commonwealth. Congratulations.
Thank you to Tamara Coffey, Chris Cathers, Tom Musgrave, and all of the Kentucky Arts Council staff. I also want to thank Governor Andy Beshear and his cabinet for honoring the arts in the bluegrass. Anyone watching this who knows me knows I cried when I was told of this news. Even as a writer, it is difficult to find words that convey the depth of my gratitude for this honor. When I looked at the long list of poet laureates, I realized very quickly that I know or have met 13 of these former laureates, everyone since 1995, beginning with James Steele, who I revered so much that I stood in his line to get my book signed one year at the Kentucky Book Fair in Frankfort and was so excited that I couldn't go up to meet him. I just stood back, starstruck, saying, "There he is," but I didn't move. I've also met Richard Taylor, of course, visited his bookstore. I think I met Joe Servant in Bowling Green at the Southern Festival of Books. Among these 13 are mentors and teachers. Sina Naslin taught my first fiction class in graduate school at Spalding University, and I'm still learning from her tutelage in both fiction and in how best to lead a writer's life. James Baker Hall, along with Marianne, attended a Lexington Arts Council reading in the early years and stayed afterwards to introduce themselves to me and to encourage my work. At the time, I didn't know they were writers of great merit. I thought they were just kind people, and they were. Jim and I would have many great conversations over the years, and he is greatly missed. I took Gurney Norman's workshop at Hazard Community College's Spring Writers Conference years ago, and he became a mentor to me, to the Appalachian poets, to the world. Gurney is the Johnny Appleseed of Kentucky's literary landscape, planting seeds all across the state to grow Kentucky writers. Before the pandemic, we often found ourselves in the car headed to some writing event. Once, Gurney drove me through Perry County and recounted stories of his life and his people. Then in turn, I drove him to the Harriet Arnault Conference, and on our way back, I took a winding path through Casey County and told him the story of my home place and my people. I first met Frederick Smock through his work at the Kentucky Foundation for Women. I took a poetry class from Jeff Worley at the Carnegie Center, where I served as assistant director years ago. And from him, I learned about poetry, but also so much about teaching. I wrote one of my poems that appear in the new collection in his class. And the women. Oh, the women. Jane Gentry, Georgetta Lyon, Maureen Moorhead are all brilliant, all my word sisters. I've taught with Jane in workshops across the state, but also been inspired by her grace. She was the consummate poet, teacher, and a passionate advocate for Kentucky writers. Georgella and I talk writing, but I think the first conversations we had were about mothering when our boys were teenagers. They are men now. We've had tea and talked about what ought to be in this world, and I'm grateful. Maureen Moorhead and I taught together at Spalding University and have spent hours late in the evening talking about writing, talking about life, and laughing with our heads thrown back. And Frank X. Walker, here we are, Frank, again. Frank is family. We grew up 30 minutes apart, him in Boyle County and me in Casey County. Our first cousins are married to one another. He brought me into the fold of the Appalachian poets nearly 30 years ago. He is my brother in the word and in the world. And me, since becoming a published writer in 2000, so many of my speeches and talks have begun like this. Once upon a time, far up a holler, in the hills of Kentucky, there was a cinnamon-skinned daughter with hair as black as starling's wings. A writer is all she ever wanted to be. I'm going to retire that phrase after today, but it's true. All I ever wanted to be was a writer. And books began that journey. This journey began with me in my grandmother's arms being read to as a child. I was a child enamored with books and how they transported me out of our little house on Indian Creek to anywhere the story dared to take us. In every corner of our house were stacks of books. Books that were discarded by the school teachers my grandmother cleaned house for. Books that I ordered from the Weekly Reader. Comic books. So many, many books. Though I don't recall a book by even one Black author until college. When I read, though, the more I read, the more I wanted to become a writer. I was 14 years old the first time I was published. The book was a romantic teenage story that I bound myself with my grandmother's Singer sewing machine. A book of 14 pages with one crooked seam along the red line that snaked down the left side of the blue lined paper. My block lettering was large and leaning, and I carefully placed on the cover, "My dream come true." There was only one hand-stitched, hand-lettered copy. My grandmother guarded this first work of mine. She watched me from behind the screen door, my body cradled in the overgrown roots of a tree, going about writing like killing snakes. Her call for me to come to supper fell on deaf ears. She found me down by the creek or out by the edge of the woods at dusk in a scribbling fury. She respected my shut doors and witnessed my silence while I worked on that first book. And although she died in 1994, I feel that she is still giving me permission and space to write. When my grandmother died, I found that book tucked safely away in a box of papers with my name on it. The book was nestled in its own folder among the bad rhyming poems and choppy fairy tales that made up my early writings. But they were always of Kentucky. I am someone who has walked hills and knobs, someone who was grandparent raised, someone who knows the value of sorghum and pinto beans and rhubarb pie and bread on the table. Who knows outhouses and one-room churches? Who knows a country woman's rituals, foodways, and celebrations? I write from the core of my own existence. My literary imagination will always live in Kentucky, and that is something I'm very proud of. As poet laureate, I hope to continue to build community across the state and to help increase awareness of the many voices that make up Kentucky's story. Through writing workshops, readings, and visits to libraries, schools, and non-traditional community spaces, I want to gather the stories of the bluegrass and hold them up for everyone to see. I also hope to start a podcast that amplifies elementary school writers, our elder writers, and emerging writers who are making a national impact like Joy Priest and Gwenda Bond, among so many others. There is more than one way to be a writer, so I want to not only highlight our traditional poets, but also other literary art forms, including Kentucky fiction writers, memoirists, and filmmakers. This shows just how diverse and divine our Commonwealth is. I'd be remiss if I didn't say that I'll remember this year that I became Kentucky's Poet Laureate as a dire one. I'm talking to you via my home office instead of being in the Capitol Rotunda in Frankfort celebrating. More than 5,000 Kentuckians have died from COVID. This has been the year our democracy has bent and nearly crumbled. And we are still seeking justice for Breonna Taylor, who was killed in Louisville 1 year ago. But also, this is the month that I'm named Kentucky Poet Laureate, and we have seen the first signs of spring. And with spring, there is hope. Kentuckians are being vaccinated. Claudia Love-Mayer, coordinator of the Kentucky Black Writers Collective at the Carnegie Center in Lexington, just held a beautiful memorial for Breonna Taylor featuring Kentucky writers, including Frank X. Walker, George Ella Lyon, Ronald Davis, Jude McPherson, Savannah Sipple, Silas House, Hannah Drake. Hannah Drake is in Louisville doing powerful work as an activist, teacher, and poet, exacting change, inspiring but also holding institutions and individuals accountable. Damaris Hill is putting the finishing touches on a new book about Black girlhood. Frank Walker is continuing to tour with Masked Man Black, poems about the pandemic and protest. Joy Priest just signed a contract to edit a collection of poems by Louisville's Black poets. Filmmaker Joan Brannon released a documentary, Fire and Heart, a blueprint for liberation during the pandemic, and it has been widely viewed. And Kentucky writer Gail Jones, who has been described as one of the great writers of the 20th century, her new novel, Palmares, will be released in September, followed by 5 new works to be published by her in the next 2 years. So we have so much to look forward to. I want to amplify the voices of all Kentucky writers. So if you are a Kentucky writer, tell me about your story or invite me to tell you about mine. Thank you all. This is a flash piece that was published in the Kenyon Review earlier this year. A meditation on grief, things we carry, things we remember. I remember this place where burdens wash away in the dark and mothers' dresses float like blossoms. A boy drowns, his head turned toward home, body facing the farmer's house where the girl who loves him sleeps. She is the farmer's daughter. They say she is the one who hit his head, the one who hoisted the rock, the one who watched his blood ooze out. This is the way you wash your clothes in the creek. This is the way you catch catfish in deep water. The mothers stand in water to their knees, their dresses wafting out like sheets on a lawn. On the creek bank, a child runs circles, catching the wind, and the mother's dresses float like blossoms. The mothers sing prayers for the boy's mother who looks out her kitchen window and cries. The circle of mothers in the water whisper a prayer for the girl who tells all who will listen that she loved the boy who died. Her mother stands in the backyard, her hand on the chopping hoe, with tears streaming down her face. The fathers brood in the fields, walking slow as lepers, hearts and houses filled with grief. I almost drowned once. My grandmother's dress blossomed around her like a sail. She was my John boat in the creek. My mother stood on the shore, frozen with fear, my father's name mute on her tongue, his kiss spoiled fruit in her sweet young mouth. The dead boy's ghost haunts this place, dark water flowing like a deacon's robe. On nights spoiled with teenage trouble, I went to the creek and waited for the boy, hoping he would listen. "Do you dream of the farmer's daughter?" I asked. "Are you sorry for what you've done?" He didn't answer. They say he raped the girl, but I wasn't afraid of him. By then, I had been raped too and was becoming a dangerous woman. I waited for him and held court with the moon. "I'm here," I said. "Let's get this thing done." In this place where burdens wash away, I stood, my dress flowering, floating. I was drowning too, my face turned toward home, my black body facing my father's house where my mother cried for me. They say the boy was handsome, but I never saw him in the flesh. At night, the creek did scare me, its rush like a boy's whispered threat in a girl's ear. But here, the mothers are always standing with water to their knees, their dresses billowing out like sheets on a line, praying because there was always something roaring in those trees, teeth gnashing, fathers killing boys for the sake of their daughters, eyes always watching, eyes always glistening in the dark.